Welcome everyone to Monday Match Analysis. I'm Gill Gross. It was an exceptional week of tennis. Daniil Medvedev snapped his title drought. Casper Ruud played lights out to win his first ever indoor hardcourt title. And Felix Auger-Aliassime continued his great form, starting with the US Open with a title of his own as the ATP Race heats up. Auger-Aliassime victorious in Antwerp, plus Jannik Sinner repeating as champion in Saudi Arabia at the Six Kings Slam. We're going to get to all of that. Yeah, it's a lot. These are always the weeks, the 250 weeks especially, where I have to spend the most time putting together the show, but usually they get the least views. And for that reason, I want to start. I don't normally do this like most YouTubers, but if you're not watching, if you're watching rather, and you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Please like the video. Please share if you can. Podcast listeners, please leave a rating and a review. It's much appreciated, especially weeks like these. So, I mentioned the 3 title winners across the ATP 250s. Just one thing to point out as far as the ATP race is concerned. Felix, number 9. Ruud, number 10. Medvedev, number 11 in the race if you take Jack Draper out of the picture. So basically everybody knocking on the door, and it'll be the top 9 in if Djokovic decides not to play. It'll be obviously the top 8 if Djokovic decides to play. But basically everybody on that border, they all tacked on 250 points, which means nobody really gained any ground. But they did come closer to Lorenzo Musetti, who now has to start watching out because these guys are on his tail. Musetti took an opening round loss to Giovanni Pericard. So that's all for the race. Let's start with Medvedev, who wins in Almaty, Kazakhstan, his 21st career title. It continues the streak of different cities. It is another unique city for Medvedev's title haul. And more significantly, it snaps an 882-day title drought dating back to Rome 2023. He beats Corentin Moutet in this final, 6-3 in the third. Now, the narrative on this match is going to be that Medvedev played out of style. And I only partially agree with that. I think there's some truth to it, but I don't think it's the full truth. I'll start with the part that I agree with. Medvedev's net rushes are through the roof in this match. He ends up 32 out of 54 net rushes in a 3-set match. Now, a lot of that, of course, is Moutet drop-shotting. A ton of that is Moutet drop-shotting. I wish I had the exact breakdown. Unfortunately, I don't, but we can say a lot of it. And I will say, Medvedev, for somebody who has a reputation of being a deep court position guy, and that reputation is deserved, I always feel like he covers the drop shot really well, unless he's way out of position to do so, which does happen sometimes. But if he's remotely in decent position to cover the drop shot, he has elite sprint speed, and his ability to drive the ball is outstanding, meaning from a low contact point, when he gets to the ball, he's one of the best out there at keeping his topspin drive grip, forehand or backhand, and actually hitting the ball hard and potentially getting the ball through the court off of that drop shot retrieval, which came in handy in some really key moments in this match. If you drop shot Medvedev and he gets there, he's actually very, very dangerous. But part of that 54 net rush figure was Daniil coming in on his own terms, specifically taking advantage of the fact that Moutet does not pass well on his backhand. The fact is, looking at this matchup coming in, and Moutet has a victory over Medvedev previously in Washington, D.C. just this year, Moutet is one of the great defenders in the sport, fantastic speed, terrific racket skills defensively. And Medvedev is somebody who does not like to play. Nobody likes Nobody likes to play great defenders, but Medvedev specifically has been bothered by great defenders because he's not the best finisher. He doesn't have the best offensive weaponry to try to deal with something like that. It's going to be hard for Medvedev off the ground to get the ball through Moutet. And that's why it was so important in this match that he came in on Moutet's backhand, because if there's one weakness for the Frenchman defensively, it's the fact that if you can get in on his backhand, he's not all that comfortable passing. He's pretty disciplined about, playing the ball low, middle, and then looking for a forehand on the next passing shot. Like he plays that cat and mouse very well. And of course, it's still tough to finish volleys against him because he's so quick. But ultimately, it was Medvedev's willingness to come in on the backhand that came in handy throughout the match, and look no further than 5-4, 30-all. And I laid it out on 3, how much trouble Medvedev has had in some high-pressure situations throughout the year, and how many matches he's lost serving for the match, how many matches he's lost up match point. It's like 4 or 5 matches this year he was in prime winning position. So it's 5-4, 30-all in this match. Daniil hits a big serve, forehand drive volley approach, cross court at Moutet's backhand, and then hits a delicate half volley, drop short for a forced error. Really good hands on that volley as well. So he came up with the big first serve and then got in on Moutet's backhand. And then on the championship point, 40-30, he hits a backhand down the line approach. A ball that often Medvedev just wouldn't approach on. It was not such a short ball that it was clear that Daniil was going to come in on it. It was a real smart, proactive, tactical decision to come in on the backhand down the line. Has to come up with another difficult volley. Low, but keeps it nice and short, forces Moutet to pop up the next ball, and Medvedev has a sitter volley to finish on the next one. So the Daniil net rushing, I would not frame it as, Medvedev has started this reinvention process of being someone who's willing to come forward. Not my interpretation of this at all whatsoever. My interpretation of this is it's an extreme matchup, and credit to Medvedev for adjusting to the matchup. But I do not expect Daniil to come out at the Paris Masters or for the rest of the year or for the rest of his career for that matter and be like, oh yeah, I come in a lot. No, I think this was a Moutet-specific thing. But a good job by Medvedev there. Where I disagree with the overall narrative, though, that this was all about, Medvedev leaving his comfort zone, and that's why he won the match, is because I think so much of Medvedev playing better recently, and since the U.S. Open loss against Bonzi and parting ways with Gilles Servara and bringing in Johansson and the other coach whose name is escaping me right now, he has been playing better tennis. But so much of that, in my eyes, is a recommitment to his strengths, particularly the Medvedev defense, which looks rejuvenated. Now, Moutet is not necessarily an attacking player, okay? He defends more than anybody else. But when he does attack, which is still sometimes, when he does attack, he asks you to cover a lot of court. He's constantly giving you awkward mid-court balls, obviously threatening with the drop shot constantly, bringing Medvedev inside the court, opening up short angles, and then using his forehand to, when there's an opening, muscle the ball through the court. And despite all that, Medvedev wreaked havoc with his court coverage. That version of Medvedev that just feels like you're playing against a goddarn wall has not always been there this year. It seems to be back. He's smothering the court. He's extremely patient. He's embracing physicality, which is not easy to do against Moutet. One of the most underrated parts of Moutet's game is his physical fitness, because he's known as like this talented player who must not work very hard. Contrary to the case, Moutet must work extremely hard to play the way he plays. For his legs to facilitate that, he must work extremely hard on his fitness levels. But Medvedev went toe-to-toe with Moutet in the physicality department and at times got Corentin in the red and was able to chip away at the legs, which is a hallmark of prime Medvedev. That is what he did to you. He wore you out. And he's also striking the ball. Sometimes when I put these things together, I talk about defense and consistency and patience. It sounds like Medvedev's just going full pusher mode. Of course, that's not how it works in professional tennis. You can't win like that. That's not really what Daniil is doing. He's striking the ball with enough confidence, enough depth to remain unattackable, and is also applying pressure. But the bedrock of Medvedev's baseline game, which is rooted in rally tolerance, defensive capabilities, physicality, that has reemerged here. That, to me, is why his results have started to look better. Not some crazy idea like he's coming forward all the time, right? Look at the decisive break in the third set. Okay, look no further than the decisive break in the third set. Moutet had an easy put-away volley. Medvedev chased it down and came up with another one of those ultra-low drop shot retrievals where he was able to drive the ball cross court for a winner. The second point Medvedev won, Moutet hit or maybe this was the third point. This was actually the third point in the game that Medvedev won. Moutet hit a max pace inside-in forehand into space, everything he could muster. Medvedev gets there, throws up a lob. Moutet misses the overhead. Good deep defensive lob. Poor overhead, but still, that's Medvedev getting to an extra ball. 15-40. Again, Moutet went all-out rip, forehand inside in. Medvedev absorbed it. Deep, neutralizing backhand, allowed him to take control later in the point. And what did he do? He approached the Moutet backhand. This was at 15-40. He approached the Moutet backhand and did just enough with an overhead eventually to finish the point. But there were 2 points in there, 2 points in this game where Medvedev looked dead to rights. Him winning those kinds of points, that's my point. Notebook dump. Good resilience by Medvedev. It must have been very painful for him to not break at 1-2 in the third. He had tons of opportunities and didn't get it done, but responded really well emotionally, which is something that I look for with Medvedev for sure. I highlighted the clutch issues on 3. I alluded to it earlier. This wasn't exactly a perfect performance in that department. He was shaky on the break points. I admired his courage in the moment of truth when it was time to close the match. But definitely there was some wobbliness there. What I'll say about that is, what's the cure to that? How do you fix that? Confidence is the cure. Winning is the medicine. It starts with winning. You talk to tennis players who are struggling, and that's what they all say, right? You don't often get a creative answer. It's usually, I'm just not feeling that confident. How are you going to get confident? I got to win. That's just how it is. Lastly, difference in serve firepower. Moutet, so great at making returns. So great at it. But the difference in quality of return is huge between these two. Medvedev off of Moutet's, slower slice serve, he's taking full cuts. He's playing deeper, harder into the court. Moutet is putting a lot in, but a lot of weaker block returns that Medvedev can attack. And one thing that I admired from Daniil is he was very courageous taking on dry volleys when Moutet popped it up. He was very willing to say, okay, if you're going to pop up a block return, I'm taking that next one out of the air. That was pretty effective. Okay, that is it for Almaty. We will now move on to Stockholm, where Casper Ruud took out Ugo Humbert in one of the best performances I've ever seen from the Norwegian. And there were a lot of reasons to expect coming into the match that Ruud might struggle. His head-to-head was negative against Humbert, down 3-2. Ruud's 2 wins were on clay, and they were not in straights. Humbert was 2-0 on hard court, and he possessed a win over Ruud at Wimbledon on the grass. Ruud came into the final with 13 career titles, none on indoor hard court, only 1 on hard court period. Humbert came in with 7 career titles, 4 of them on indoor hard court. Not to mention that Ruud is worse against lefties than he is righties. Against lefties outside the top 20, Ruud possesses a 65% win rate. Against righties outside the top 20, his win rate is 72%. 7 percentage points difference over his career. This is tour level, righties versus lefties. And I'm filtering for ranking so that it's not skewed by your Rafas of the world. And that's a significant difference there. And it makes sense why. Against a lefty, Casper's hitting more backhands. He's hitting tougher backhands. The second return is a major factor to me. For a righty, it's kind of tough to kick the ball into Ruud's backhand and avoid his runaround. Like, he's often going to get around it and hit a forehand. Against a lefty who can slice it and get more width, really hard for Ruud to run around. And he's got to start second serve return points on his backhand, which is not really what he wants to do. And in general, it's hard to find runarounds against the lefties on that ad side cross court. Casper loves the ad side cross court. He wants forehands from that side. He's willing to play that, those heavy, deep backhands, ideally, in order to earn himself a forehand in that pattern. But against the lefty, he's dealing with usually more pace coming in, which is less time to run around. He's dealing with just more quality in general, and he's more threatened with the down the line, because players hit the forehand down the line on average a lot better than they hit a backhand down the line. So against a lefty, Ruud's just not getting as much joy in that particular cross court, which he loves to win against righties, torment them with forehands inside out that jump above their head. Maybe not on an indoor hard court, but you get the picture. But what happened in this match? Ruud played out of his mind. That's what happened. He was unreal. He won 6-2, 6-3. Barely does it justice. Casper Ruud won 31 straight service points. In fact, he arrived at championship point at 40 love with a chance to go 32 in a row. He went from 1-all, love 15 in the first set to up championship point without losing a service point. He said after the match, quote, "I think I played my best match of the year." He said, quote, "I don't remember facing someone," Humbert said, quote, "I don't remember facing someone playing this well." So let's follow up on the lefty thing. There was no relief serving into Casper's backhand, especially on the second serve, because he was connecting. Was it always flashy or eye-opening? No, just solid, deep backhand returns that gave Ruud oftentimes the right to hit a forehand on the next ball. There was no joy approaching Ruud's backhand for Humbert. Humbert, before the match, would have wanted to come in and make Casper pass off of that side, but Humbert was 0 for 5 at the net in set 1 and 2 for 9 at the net in the match. And some of these passing shots from Casper, some of them were driven, some of them were sliced really, really low. Ruud was playing with great speed on his backhand cross court. This really stood out to me. And the speed of the backhand cross court prevents Humbert from redirecting with the forehand down the line, which is how he structures his attacking. He's always trying to redirect, but often Casper's ball was just coming in with too much quality, and he just had to go back cross court. It wasn't allowing Humbert to get on his front foot. And similarly, there was a lot of speed on the forehand trades. Now, of course, the forehand is a far bigger weapon for Casper, and when it's on, it's one of the most devastating shots on the tour. the key on an indoor hard court is, for Casper, is not overspinning it, to play through the court, to flatten it out a little bit. I felt he did that, except when he didn't, it was even more effective. What do I mean by that? What I mean is, because Ruud typically was hitting his forehand fast and through the court, when he did take away some pace, added some height and some spin, Humbert was actually thrown off by it. There was a big deuce point, and I think Casper got the break in this game, where that's exactly what Casper did. He hit a heavier, slower ball, and Humbert missed right away, and that's because he was used to the faster one. So variety is sometimes shoved into a box when we talk about tennis, and we're just looking for drop shots and volleys and slicing. It doesn't always have to be like that. Casper Ruud's stock forehand can be a form of variety. The point is, he's mixing up height, spins, and speeds, and that makes it variety. He wants to be less predictable. He was less predictable. That just doesn't always mean drop shots and volleys. And Humbert is a very contact point sensitive player. Another thing that stuck out to me when it comes to Ruud's performance was his slice defense. Consistently staying very, very low, not popping up, making Humbert play from an uncomfortably low position consistently. Sometimes off of the return, sometimes, as I mentioned, off of net approaches when he's having to hit a low volley. I thought it was a masterclass by Casper in just continuing to disrupt Humbert's contact point, because he's so good at his waistline. He's so good. But if you can just keep it out of there, he can be pretty uncomfortable. Ruud's second serve, really well placed, generally aggressive. Wasn't really having to defend behind his second serve much. In fact, he got Humbert to move back at one point. Humbert hates moving back. He doesn't want to do that. But that's how much respect Ruud's second serve ended up getting. Off the ground, what can you say? Automatic and lethal. Both wings, any direction. How about this from Ruud? 22 total winners, 15 total errors. And I'm not talking about unforced errors. Nope. I'm talking about total errors. He hit more winners than total errors, unforced or not. In the advanced analytics, what jumped out? Conversion score, 97%. If I were to guess, I didn't see the raw number, but Humbert probably won maybe 1 point all match in which he had to defend. Every single point that Ruud was able to jump on offense, he won every single point. That's what 97% basically tells me in a straight set match. Unbelievable. The other thing I want to point out, last thing, if you look at the bigger picture throughout the week, Ruud's first serve win percentages through the roof. Came into the final at 84%. In the final, he was 92%. That's first serve win percentage. Look, the serve, it's not a huge strength, but it can be good enough where it's really setting up that forehand to do the talking. And then when the forehand's on, the forehand's on. And it can be a really a lethal 1-2 punch. And it needs to be in these kinds of conditions. It certainly was in Stockholm. And obviously some sentimental value for Ruud winning this title, being Scandinavian. It is one of, is it the most prestigious tournament in Scandinavia? I would say so. There's Båstad, but I think that this one is kind of the big one historically, especially with the history of Swedish tennis and how strong that was for a couple of decades there. Another thing with Ruud is, if you look at the stats for the season, I think he might be the tour leader in indoor hardcourt victories. How about that? Wouldn't have guessed that. But he had that big run in Dallas, and now with this run, I think he's definitely double-digit indoor hardcourt wins for the year. Them stats are them stats. One last thing. I know I keep lying and saying it's the last thing. Ruud has gone down to a 98 square inch frame. Still playing with the Jannik Z zone, but he's gone from 100 square inches to 98 square inches. That typically equals more precision. And that is much more common on the ATP Tour. And it always struck me as odd that somebody so strong with so much racket speed and acceleration was using an 100 square inch frame, as Casper Ruud did for most of his career. That was a little odd. Ultimately, when it comes to racket switches, it's all about confidence. Whatever racket gives you the most confidence is the racket that you should be using. Whether that's a more powerful setup that is going to allow you to swing easier and still feel like there's enough on your ball, or is it a less powerful racket that's going to allow you to take bigger cuts at the ball, feel like you're swinging bigger, and still be able to control it? So Ruud dialing down the forgiveness and the power level by going to the 98 square inches, but increasing the control, that has the potential to give him more confidence to hit out on his forehand without fear of missing. So interesting move. I obviously, I'm not in the business of liking or disliking players' equipment changes. Ultimately, it's this is the kind of thing it's totally up to the player. But if you were to ask me full stop, what makes more sense for Casper Ruud and his play style, 98 or 100, I would tell you 98 every day of the week. Let's finish on, we've got two more. Auger-Aliassime versus Lehecka. This is not my favorite head-to-head in the world. And neither player could be very competitive against the other player's serve, I found. And that's what I was expecting coming in, and that was definitely the case. I also thought there were a lot of poor errors in this match, but it's hard in a rhythmless match. So let's go straight to the rally breakdown. There were 214 points in this match. 214. And of those, 11 of them went 9 shots or more. 168 of them were in the 1 through 4 shot rally category, which makes up for 79% of the points played. So essentially, 4 out of every 5 points were going to be wrapped up in either 1 or 4 shots. 1 through 4. Felix had an advantage in both of those rally categories. He won the 1 through 4 and he won the 9+. It was actually Lehecka with a slight edge in 5 through 8. So let's just ignore that mid-range for now. First off, why did Felix have an edge 1 through 4, winning 54% of those points? Superior serving, first and foremost. Making first serves. Felix made 83% of his first. Lehecka was down at 64%. Not terrible, but not at a Felix level. There was not a big disparity in first serve effectiveness, but man, on an indoor hard court with as much artillery as Auger-Aliassime possesses on the serve +1, if he makes 83% of his first serves, good luck. We know that he's not serving those into the middle of the box. That's not how Felix rolls. Second serve is where you saw an effectiveness gap for Felix. Average speed. Auger-Aliassime was hitting 106 on average. Second serve. Lehecka was at 99. And that was visual. That you could see the difference there. For some reason, Lehecka in this match was below his season average of 105 by a lot. I'm not sure why, especially indoors in a final against Felix, because Auger-Aliassime was hammering second serve returns with his forehand. And to me, that is a huge no-no when you're playing Felix and he's standing in. You've got to find a way to get it to his backhand on the second serve or you're doing yourself a massive disservice. If he's going to cheat and run around, that's one thing. Keep him honest, slide it into his forehand. But Lehecka didn't really have any of those options. There were a lot of ineffective second serves. Felix, on the other hand, I think the most improved part of his game in the last, I don't know what range. Let's call it the last 2 years. I know last year wasn't a great year for Felix, but let's call it the last 2 years because, even in 2022, the last really good Auger-Aliassime year, I didn't think he was stellar on the second serve. I think that's gotten a lot better. And it's more of a slice serve than a kick serve, but with that kind of speed, and when he goes hard into the body and then mixes it up out into the forehand, very difficult to attack. This was a match where whichever player got in attack was more often than not going to win the point. Defensively, they were both outmatched. And that's why the serve effectiveness was so important here. Now, do long rallies matter? Because let me tell you, I already gave you the number of how many went 9+, 11. I'll tell you that Felix won 7. That is, by all counts, statistically insignificant. 7 out of 11 in a match where 214 points were played, that does not matter. But here's what I would argue. Way more of the extended exchanges occurred in the big moments, on the big points. There have been studies, there's research from Tennis Abstract, Jeff Sackman. This has been verified in long-term studies. Point length or rally length increases under pressure, on break points, in tie breaks, in both of those scenarios, that it was studied and confirmed. And why is that? Well, more pressure means more passivity. Returners put in a higher level of focus and effort level, which is generally required. More discipline on return points, typically required to be maximally effective on it. So there were some rallies that developed on big points here. In the first set, love 30, they got into a rally. Lehecka made a forehand on forced error. This is on Felix's serve. 30-40, breakpoint Lehecka, 2-all in the first. Got into a rally. Lehecka drove a forehand long for an unforced error. At 4-5 in the second set tiebreak, they got into a rally. Lehecka made a forehand on forced error. That set up 2 championship points for Felix. He did not get it done. He lost that second set tiebreak. But had he not, and he was a little bit fortunate that Felix couldn't really come up with a serve down the stretch of that second serve tiebreak, not an effective one at least, that 5-4 point would have been basically the decider. In the third set, we'll get to the third set in a moment, but I don't think long rallies really dictated the outcome there for Felix. But those were some big spots. Lehecka's rally tolerance, not great. Very prone, at least in this match, I'll at least say in this match, very prone to overhitting. On neutral balls, when the rally starts to get long, he's jacking up the pace and missing long often. He does not feel comfortable unless he's the hammer. He does not like to risk getting attacked, and you feel that anxiousness in his game. And I wish sometimes for Lehecka there was a better understanding of opening up space and taking time away. Like the way he looks to do damage is sometimes very one note as far as it being just about pace. Felix is actually much better at, first of all, moving inside the court and figuring out opportunities to take time away, but also playing to the sidelines. In fact, Felix, when I fault him, it's actually the opposite problem, is that he's shrinking his targets and playing too close to the sidelines. But Lehecka, all of these forehand unforced errors I mentioned 3 of them, they're all going long. They're all just overhit balls long. Auger-Aliassime, I liked his approach in the rallies here. I thought the decisions were good. He had one in the second set, in the tiebreak, his forehand was awful. So that was just a shot malfunctioning on him. The shot was the problem. But I didn't think that the choices were bad. I didn't think the approach was bad. I guess just for some reason, under pressure, the shot broke down. But in general, I thought his misses were usually coming from high percentage attacking positions. And if there was no look to attack and he was trading and playing a neutral ball, he's making that ball. One of the big differences recently, since the U.S. Open, is he's making that ball not just on the forehand, but on the backhand. Felix's backhand is looking a lot more stable. It needs to be a low-incident shot. A low-incident shot. There should not be a lot of winners. There won't be. He can't. He's incapable. But there should also not be a lot of errors. In this final, they play a long 3-set match. Felix ends up at 2 winners and 7 unforced errors. That's really good. That's him getting the job done on that backhand. Just protect it. That's the goal. That's all he has to do. In the third set, Felix got the break at 1-2, winning 3 points outright off the return. Just some missed spots on the serve from Lehecka, some second serve that got punished. And Jiri was not able to handle that ball quickly back at his feet. Like, it takes really good hand skills, soft hand skills, to be able to absorb that shot. It's an underrated skill, I think. And Lehecka 3 times in this one game, none of them were unmakeable. They were great returns by Felix. Don't get me wrong. Well-earned forced errors. But to miss all 3 of them for Lehecka, you'd want him to maybe dig one of those out, at least 1 or 2 of them. And then on the break point, Felix, great defensive effort with a stretch forehand return into a backhand pass, open stance. Athleticism, good defensive play, surviving big power on a serve +1. Those kinds of moments were rare in this match, but Felix came up with a big one when it really counted there. And then he'd end up getting another break to take the championship, actually. He would break serve to win the title, just hammering Lehecka's second serves throughout this game. It goes back to what we talked about with Lehecka's second serve just being way too attackable. So strong performance in the final, other than the forehand in the second set tiebreak from Felix. It was a great serving and a really good week from FAA, where he's going to hold serve a lot in these conditions. He's not necessarily going to break a ton, but he went 5-1 in tiebreaks throughout the week. That'll do it. That'll get it done. Ending on 6 kings. What I believe is the fourth most important, which is why it's going last. I still don't think that this event is worthy of a ton of analysis, especially tactically. You look at a guy in Sinner and Alcaraz, they are players who at this stage compete for major titles against one another. It is the most important rivalry in all of tennis. They are not going to play patterns or tactics on a regular basis that is going to tip off their opponent or let them get used to or clock or pick up anything, right? It's not worth it. So you're never going to kind of go to something that you like over and over again. You're not going to bear down on tactics, because doing so would be offering up a window or a hint. And I know these two know each other very well, right? But it doesn't matter. The margins are so slim that every tiny half percentage point counts. So they are never going to approach this match tactically like it's the real deal. And, emotionally, the match was clearly very different from a regular match. There was clearly no stress on either side of the net. I thought the discipline was down. I thought the shot selection was often pretty reckless. But it was still, look, they're hyper talented, and it was not bad to watch. They put on a good show. Jannik Sinner, of course, wins. He defends his title. I did a whole thing last year at the time about why the results of this event don't matter. And I got a ton of pushback from Sinner fans. Ton. At the time. Now, fast forward, you go through the rest of the year, and I just couldn't help but notice that not once was it referenced by the players at any point after the match, right? It was not referenced in any kind of analysis that I heard. Coverage of Roland Garros, coverage of Wimbledon, coverage of Rome. The fact is, nobody was talking about it because this event lives in isolation. This head-to-head is the most talked about thing in the sport, yet nobody ever even considered counting the 6 Kings match from last year in the discussion, in the overall discussion, regarding Sinner and Alcaraz's head-to-head. Again, the most scrutinized head-to-head in all the sport. So I'm not saying that there's an issue with the event or that you can't enjoy the event. But when I said last year that the result and the match overall would be forgotten, as far as I'm concerned, the only thing that happened for the rest of the year is I was proven correct. So what happened in this final? I'll keep it pretty basic. There's only one thing that I think I really do want to address. Sinner basically served Alcaraz off the court, especially in the first set, where Carlos just couldn't really get into a lot of points. And that hasn't happened much at all in their head-to-head in instances where it counts, right? I talked about that with Tom Corey. I talked about it in an analytics deep dive that I did about a month ago, where Sinner's serve quality metric is superior to Alcaraz's, but in their head-to-head, Alcaraz's is superior to Sinner's. Sinner was 73% first serves unreturned in set one. Now, they changed the motion after the U.S. Open. I didn't cover this after Beijing, unless I'm forgetting. They changed the motion after the U.S. Open. Simone Vagnosi said that he felt like the rhythm is better, that the precision is better. And I posted some deeper analysis on social media, IG, TikTok, X. Follow me at Gill Gross on all of those platforms, where, a video was sent to me before Beijing. So after the U.S. Open, before Beijing, where Vagnosi was basically putting the handle of his racket behind Sinner's elbow as they went through the motion, clearly training elbow positioning. Now, I wasn't sure at the time, are they reinforcing the elbow positioning? Or are they making an adjustment? And I couldn't tell from the angle on that video. But post-Beijing, Hugh Clark, Threat of Order, you guys know I'm a big fan of the newsletter, he did a side-by-side screenshot, which revealed that, indeed, Sinner's elbow positioning has been moved back a little bit. So a deeper elbow positioning, which means that it's further behind his back shoulder. A feature of, well, if you want to look towards extreme examples of deep elbow positionings, look no further than Ben Shelton, look no further than Andy Roddick. And by the way, look at a lot of the great throwing motions. Look at a pitcher in Major League Baseball, same thing. Always going to be a pretty deep elbow positioning behind the back shoulder, which allows for easier access to coil the hips and the shoulders as far as rotation is concerned. The further I get my elbow back, the further I can kind of turn away. So it unlocks certain rotation and it unlocks more explosive range of motion. There's probably a lot of other details that I'm not smart enough to really explain right now. But that adjustment was certainly made. Maybe they tweaked the takeaway path as well. I can't really see it definitively, but I do think it's possible. And hey, Sinner's serve looked awesome throughout Six Kings, and that's something where the fact that, I don't know, like the serve is not really affected by the opponent and what your opponent is doing. Obviously, it's just you. So I think it's a more credible observation from an exhibition tournament, but also Beijing. Serve was awesome throughout Beijing. So far, early returns on Sinner's serve, really, really good. All right. That'll do it for this episode of Monday Match Analysis. I'll see you one more time this week. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.